Hi, and welcome to this presentation on assisting compliance with WHS legislation. My name is Helen Holoska, and I'll be speaking to Chris Anthony, the subject manager for this first unit in WHS Certificate 4 and Skill Set courses. So, Chris, why is this the first unit that students are asked to complete? And what will they learn as they make their way through this unit of competency?
Thanks, Helen. Yes, look, the reason that we ask students to commence with legislation is because that's what governs work health and safety. And what I mean by that is the reason that we're looking at safety is because it is law. And if you have an understanding of the law, then you start to be in a stronger position to provide assistance to your employer or your clients. So what will students learn in this unit? They'll get a better understanding of legislation, what makes up the legislation, and how to navigate their way through it. After this unit, you'll be in a much better position then to understand the units that follow.
That's very good, thanks. Over the past few years, there has been a lot of talk about harmonising WHS legislation across Australia. Can you provide a brief explanation of what harmonisation means and how close are we to achieving this goal?
Yeah, sure. Back in 2009 through to 2012, COAG, that is the state government representatives, met with the federal government, the Australian government, to look at how they could bring work health and safety legislation together across Australia. In 2011, they introduced the Work Health and Safety Bill, and at that time, the whole idea was that all states would adopt that bill and therefore have a common legislation. Has this happened? No. Victoria and Western Australia continue to stand apart from work health and safety. And so in Victoria, we've still got OHS legislation, and in Western Australia, we've got occupational safety and health legislation. However, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, just because in Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, for example, we call the legislation work health and safety. In actual fact, each state government has the right to change it, to tweak it, to make it work for them. A good example at the moment is that Queensland has now gone out on their own and they have changed some of their work health safety legislation, so it does not reflect the model bill. What does all this mean to you? It's important that whatever state you're working in, you look at your state government's legislation. So if I'm in Victoria, I'm looking at Occ Health and Safety. In New South Wales, I'm looking at Work Health and Safety Act of New South Wales. And if I'm in South Australia, I'm looking at Work Health Safety Act, South Australia. Please bear this in mind as you begin to work through this course and take your journey on work health and safety.
Chris, you have put up the slide showing the legislation hierarchy. Because it is such a mix of legal instruments and other related documentation, can you give us a brief overview of the various components and their relationship with each other?
Yeah, sure. I've just put up on the screen a hierarchy, or what I call a hierarchy of legislation. We can see in this triangle that Work Health Safety Act overrides all else. In other words, the Work Health Safety Act is law and all duty holders must abide by that law. Work Health and Safety Regulation then sits underneath that Act, and it's there to provide more detail to duty holders so that they understand what it is they need to do in order to comply with the Act. Sitting under the regulation is codes of practice. Codes of practice are prepared by the regulator in each state or endorsed by a regulator in each state, and they provide detailed information on what duty holders need to look at when they're carrying out a particular task or working through a particular procedure. The interesting thing with codes of practice is that whilst they must be considered, they need not be followed. What I mean by that is I've considered the code of practice, but I've chosen to go down a different pathway. That's fine, as long as I'm prepared to justify and to show how my method was better than the code of practice. Just as a side note, that particular piece of information won't apply in Queensland after the 1st of July. What they're doing there is changing their act to say, if it's a code of practice, you must follow it. Australian standards are then the fourth layer of legislation. Australian standards are there to assist people for quality and to provide safe services. If an Australian standard is lifted into the regulation, then obviously it becomes part of the law. But if it stands outside of that, again, it needs to be considered and we need to follow it if we're looking for best practice. Guidance material. Guidance material is prepared by the regulator in each state. It's not a code of practice, it's additional information that the regulator has prepared in order to assist duty holders in meeting their work health and safety obligations. So guidance material may be a safety alert, perhaps something's happened in a particular industry and the regulator wants all of that industry to understand what's occurred and what they suggest they do, then they'll produce a guideline. So hierarchy then is the Act, the regulation, codes of practice, Australian standards and guidance materials.
Very good. Now, many of us have heard that the legislation in Australia is performance-based rather than prescriptive legislation. Can you explain what's the difference? What does it mean?
Yeah, sure. Look, if we talk first of all of prescriptive legislation, you'll all understand this example, the Motor Traffic Act. And that doesn't matter whether it's in New South Wales or Victoria, South Australia. Motor Traffic Act is prescriptive. What I mean by that, I'm driving along a road, I come to a stop sign, it's 2 a.m. in the morning, and I decide not to stop, but to roll through the stop sign. Police officer pulls me over 100 metres up the road, and I say to the officer, "Oh, I know what you want." He says, "Yes, sir, you drove through the stop sign." I say, "Yeah, but officer, it was 2 a.m. in the morning. I could see that nothing was coming, so I'd made a decision just to roll through." Police officer says to me, "Yeah, that might be the case, but the law states you must stop. You didn't stop, and here's your fine." That's prescriptive legislation. Work health and safety legislation isn't like that. Work health and safety legislation is what we call performance-based. In other words, the legislation tells the duty holder what it is that they need to achieve and then leaves it up to the duty holder what pathway they take to ensure compliance. A good example of that is workplace health and safety consultation. We know that under the Act, all duty holders, all employers must consult with their workers. However, the Act leaves it up to the duty holder to decide how they will consult. Health and safety representatives, work health safety committees, or other agreed arrangements. And as long as they adopt one of those, they choose their pathway, performance-based. And again, if they're challenged, they need to be able to justify why that worked best for them. So work health and safety legislation is performance-based. A lot of people say, "Oh, that's a weakness." I can tell you honestly, it's a strength, because we cannot impose safety legislation or safety rules on each and every employer and say, this is the way it must be done. If we do that, all we're going to do is to increase the chance of adding hazards into the workplace. Performance-based legislation is a strength, and therefore it applies to work health and safety.
So it's up to each employer to decide to what degree they will go to comply with legislation.
Exactly. It's up to them to decide what's best and the best course of action for them.
Very good. Now let's have a look at the unit of competency and look at the learning resources which are available to TAFE Digital students as they commence their studies in this unit.
Yeah, sure. Look, I don't want to be too long-winded here, but there is a heap of information on our Open Learning Support webpage for students enrolled in the Work Health and Safety course. Obviously, you've got learning materials and you'll be able to navigate your way through the OLS, and this session is not going to teach you how to do that. So you've got learning material, but you've also got what we call the Work Health and Safety Resource Centre. It's a library link and it's beneath, and you'll find it on each of the resource pages under each unit. This resource link, as I say, opens up a library, and within that library, it speaks to each subject. This one, BSBWHS402, consultation 403, risk management 404. So I must implore you to have a look to find that particular library site. If you can't find it, then obviously you're going to contact the teaching section, and we'll talk a bit about that later in this session. So learning resources and that library site is a predominant way that we work through this particular subject, but also the course in general.
Okay, and also we have a tab for each jurisdiction as well there. So
yes, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes, in that library site, for instance, if you're working in New South Wales, you'll be clicking on the New South Wales Compliance tab. If you're in this course and you're in South Australia, you'll be clicking on the South Australian Compliance tab, so that you're working in your legislation underneath your jurisdiction where you live and work.
Yeah, that narrows it down. It makes it a bit easier, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking about too much information, can you suggest any shortcuts for students to be able to access specific information?
Yeah, it's a good question, and most students would probably be aware of that. But for those who aren't, if you're working in a document, let's say you're looking at the Workplace Health and Safety Act of 2011, and you're trying to find something on consultation, if you hit the keys Control F on your computer, then that'll bring up a search field, and you can type consultation into that search field, and that will highlight every instance where consultation is mentioned through the Act. And you'll be able to work your way through the index of the Act and say, that's what I want, or that isn't what I'm after. So, and you can do that in every document. You might be looking at a code of practice, and you might want to look at committees. So you type committee into this search field, and it again will highlight each time committee comes up through that code of practice. So it's a simple function, but it's a very, very useful one.
Oh, I agree. It saves a lot of time to be searching for things. Now, students often ask the question, how should I refer to specific parts of the Act and the regulation? Can you explain how students should reference the Act and the regulation, please?
Yes, look, we often get this question from students, how do I refer to parts of the Act, the reg? And it's a very simple protocol. If we're talking about the Act, then we're talking about sections of the Act. For instance, Section 19 of the Workplace Health and Safety Act of 2011 talks to the PCBU's duty of care responsibilities. Section 46 talks to work health and safety consultation. So if I'm looking at referring to that, I refer it as Section 19 or Section 46 of the Work Health Safety Act 2011. When I turn our attention to the regulation is divided into chapters and clauses. So again, as an example, clause 47 of the regulation will tell us that all duty holders must be prepared for emergencies. So again, if I'm talking about the regulation, I refer to clauses of the regulation, and for the Act, I refer to sections of the Act.
Good, thank you, that helps. Looking at the assignment for this unit, I can see that there are 2 tasks. Could you please provide a brief overview what is required in each task?
Yeah, sure, Helen. Look, this assignment in this first unit is predominantly a research assignment. You can go to the learning resources, and I would encourage you to do that, but you're not going to find one answer to any of the questions in this assignment. This assignment, again, is a research assignment. The object of this unit is that you immerse yourself in legislation and that you begin to get an understanding of where do you find information that you need. So task 1 is purely a question and answer assignment. You write the question and you provide an answer. Task 2, you're asked to prepare an information session. After you've immersed yourself in the Act, task 2 asks you to prepare an information session so that you can inform your employer of what are the key duties under work health and safety legislation.
So you mean to say that they need to put in task 2 some extracts from the legislation, or what it is what you want them to do?
Yeah, sure, Helen. I'll just run back a slide so we stay on that same topic. In task 2, what you're doing there is informing, again, your employer or senior management of what are the key components of the Act. And so what I would expect in that particular part of the assignment, students would be having topics such as responsibilities. What is the PCBU's responsibility? What is managers' and supervisors' responsibilities? They'd be speaking to the fact that we must consult with our workers, and so they'd be explaining what sections of the Act refer to consultation. They'd be explaining that we must identify and control risks in the organisation, and so they'd be speaking to section 17 of the Act. So these are the key components of legislation, and this is what your presentation would be speaking to. Not long-winded, simply bullet points of what are the topics that you're going to talk to as you work your way through this information session.
Mm-hmm. And in task 1, there are a lot of challenging questions. Can you help students to clarify? Say, for example, what are other laws that create WHS obligation on duty holders?
Yeah, sure. Look, a lot of students struggle with this. The question in the assignment asks exactly that. Give us some examples of other laws, other than the Work Health Safety Act, the Work Health Safety Regulation, that govern safety in your state. So examples that you're going to look for in your state might be workers' compensation legislation, dangerous goods, transport of dangerous goods, the Anti-Discrimination Act. They're examples of other legislation that are related to safety.
And that would also apply to all of the employers as well, and then we've got some industry-specific legislation, yeah, hazardous substances.
Certainly, yes. Yeah.
Okay, now, next curly question. Who are others under legislation?
Yeah. If when you begin to work through the Work Health and Safety Act, you will see the word others mentioned in some of the sections. Let's go back to section 19, the duty of a PCBU. It says that that organisation or that person must protect the health and safety of workers and others. But who are others? Good question. It's not defined in the Act. You're not going to find a definition for others. So in actual fact, we do it by process of elimination. We're going to find that others aren't the PCBU because that's defined. They're not officers because that word is defined. And they're not workers because that also is defined. So who then are others? And what we learn is that others are visitors, clients, customers. In other words, they're people who may be in the work, who may be at the work site, or who may be impacted by the work that's being carried out, but they're not carrying out work for the employer. And so others then are general public. And the duty holder not only owes a duty of care responsibility to workers, but also to others.
Mm-hmm. I agree. What are the training needs of workers?
Training needs of workers. Students again struggle with this particular question. What often they do is they'll go into the Act and they'll say, oh, training, you must provide training if we have a person as a health and safety representative. That's a very narrow view. The training needs of workers is determined by what activities we're asking them to perform. So for instance, if we're on a construction site and I'm asking people to work at height, I need to provide them with work safely at height. Again, if they're working in a confined space, we need to provide them with confined space training. So the training needs of workers from one organisation to another will change depending on the types of activities they're being asked to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and the last question is, what is a work group?
Yes, so the Act talks about work groups. Work groups are a fairly new concept across Australia, although they've been in Victoria for quite a few years. The reason that we divide an organisation up into work groups is so that those people with a common work task or common qualifications or common location can nominate and elect health and safety representatives. So a work group can be defined by your qualification, the work activities that you're doing, or the location that you're working in. And that group of workers can then nominate who will be their representative on a health and safety committee or to act as a health and safety representative.
Good, thank you. Well, Chris, I think it was very good to sit down and discuss what are the challenges facing the students. I hope that we can assist them with those challenges. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, look, I've just put a slide up on the screen there, and this is truly, truly important. You know, you're working away in isolation through online learning, but we want you to know that you're not on your own. So as soon as you have a question, as soon as you don't know where to go or what to look for, you've done enough. And it's time now for you to either contact the teaching section by phone or by email. And both those contact addresses are up on the screen now. Contact number 9715 8769 and that email string 010.whslearning@tafenewsouthwales.edu.au.
Thank you. I usually say to students, if they're stuck, don't stay stuck too long. We are here to help to unstuck.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Okay. We hope that you find this discussion between two of us helpful, and that we will do some more sessions in the future. If you've got any suggestions as what would be the best way to receive the information from teachers, we are more than happy to hear from you either by email. Give us some feedback on what it is what we've done today, whether it is going to be helping you, how to find the information and how to do your assignment.
Definitely, yeah, I encourage you that if you can give us some feedback on how we went and on how we can improve these types of sessions, that would be really helpful for us and improve it and improve the learning journey for our students. Thanks again.
Thanks.